Welcome to the How to Help Students Navigate the News webinar. This webinar is going to provide strategies, tools, and resources for you to apply with your learners and on your own. It's for educators, people in the field of education, it's for parents, guardians, and pretty much anybody interested in building skills in this topic. This is Pamela. I really appreciate you joining me here today. And as a little bonus, we're going to give you a free booklet and a scavenger. We're going to give you some scavenger hunt cards for navigating news. If you want a copy, stick around until the very end and we'll tell you how you can get your copy. Before we get started, everyone will be on mute mode. There is a chat feature as you have already been using it. It's for posting your questions and comments. We will interact throughout the webinar, and then if you have other certain questions, you can just post them and we'll answer them at the end. There's going to be a 10-minute Q&A, question and answer time, and just post them in the chat as they come up for you. So let's all go to the chat. Let us know from where you are joining us. Welcome to the webinar. Well, I see so many familiar names here. This is awesome. And thanks for joining us. Today, what are we going to do? We're going to be exploring various ways to analyze the news. We're reading inside the story and we're reading outside the story. And by the time this webinar has ended, you'll know a little more about what to look for and read for when consuming news. You'll have a foundation for navigating news. It's from a media literacy perspective. If you have been involved with Media Savvy Citizens, some of this may seem like a refresher, right? You will get tips for activities to do with students, plus you'll have resources to use with your students. Now, the media literacy component is the refresher, but there's a lot of information that we're providing you. So as we have told you, we are looking at the building blocks for decoding news, looking throughout the framework of media literacy and discovering different techniques to teach students, right? Okay, so Media Savvy Citizens. Who is Media Savvy Citizens? We are a New Mexico-based entity facilitating understanding, positive participation, and meaningful media interaction for New Mexico learners and for anybody who's a learner, really. We focus on enhancing media fluency initiatives. We consult, design, we implement capacity building trainings and coaching for adults and students virtually and online. Our Teachers Transform program conducted a media fluency pilot in the spring of 2020. Some of you are here joining us. Hello. And we conducted this pilot with 30 New Mexico school districts. It was valuable to educators, and it was just the perfect timing to engage students in learning and in the transition as we went into remote learning. And it was an amazing experience for all of us to be together in community. And these educators who are here. Hey there, Maria. They continue to engage their students and in a virtual world. They're super awesome. Thank you so much for joining me and Media Savvy Citizens. So my name is Pamela Pereira. I'm the founder of Media Savvy Citizens. Over the past 20 years, I have worked in the field of media education and media literacy, and I have been studying the media in various ways. And I've been working with students and teachers across New Mexico with different initiatives and involving media literacy and to get to a point of becoming fluent. And I work with various learning institutions. Early in my career, I actually was a journalist for a couple of newspapers, for the Oracle and the Tampa Tribune when I lived in Florida. I also had a stint in radio here at K-Tau radio station in Taos, New Mexico. And I do have an understanding about the process of news and journalism and facilitating media fluency like a language with media and technology is my life's focus. And that's why we're here today. So let's get on with it. How do we navigate the news? There are many options for approaching the news. What you do with college students is going to be different than what you do with elementary students. So we're hoping to provide you with information and really an overview that is and hope that there will be something there for you that you can leave with, that you can put into practice. So we have a little bits and pieces for everyone, and it's going to be a lot of information. What is news and media literacy? So first of all, let's clarify that media is any form of communication that is through a medium, such as a phone, a computer, a TV, billboard, radio, etc., and in many platforms, right? We find ourselves today through the media of our computers or phones, joining a webinar through Webinar Jam, listening to the media of navigating news. Media has its own aesthetic, it has its own message, it has its own point of view and purpose created by someone. And every day, kids sift through this information, they create media messages, they share it, etc., right? News is a form of media. And it's a form of media to decode and to understand, right? News also comes in different forms. Kids who see and act through a media literacy lens, and I would say in adults, right, are better equipped to ask questions of the media, connect it to their world, and create thoughtful media and consciously act. So media literacy is the process of finding, decoding, understanding, evaluating, creating opinions around what they're finding and understanding, and creating media, sharing media, and, sometimes acting on it, right? So moving on. Right now, we're experiencing the breakdown of trusted information sources. Today, anybody is a producer, and there's a lot of information out there. We are in the information age. These digital natives, our students, people we know who are natives, know how to use technology, but are not so great at evaluating the information that they are interacting with online. So take a look here. Stanford University did a research in 2016 with middle school, high school, and college students. And what they found is that students were having a hard time judging the credibility of information online. In 2019, they just, as you know, we're nearing the elections, they were looking at people who would be voting in 2020, right? So these are high school students. And once again, they're having a hard time and are unprepared to judge the credibility of information on the internet. And that is why we're here today. So we're going to do a poll. And I am curious. We're going to do a poll and then we're going to chat it out, right? So do you do anything in class or at home for navigating news activities? If you could plot, the poll should have dropped at this point. And I don't know if you're able to answer it. So I'm not sure what, on your, yeah, there you are, you're answering it. Yeah, so I don't know where your menu is, but you can see that there's a little thing called polls, and it should just appear, it should just drop, right? So it looks like, people do sometimes is sometimes more people are actually who are here today actually yes, and sometimes do activities in class or at home for navigating news activities. And so from our respondents, 46%, sometimes 42%, yes, 42% sometimes. It just keeps changing. So at the point where we end the poll, it's only a low percentage, like 14%, that actually don't do anything. So I'm going to end the poll. It's always fun to do these. Okay. So if you can go to the chat and you could let us know, what is it that you do for navigating news activities if you do specific things in class, right? It looks like Mallory's saying she doesn't hear anything. And so just in case you're having a hard time not hearing things, is anybody else not able to hear me? You may need to jump out and jump back in. Like leave the webinar and then enter the webinar again if you're having a hard time. Usually, and you might be the only one here that's not able to hear. And I'm sorry about that, Mallory. Okay, good. Okay, so it's working for some people. Here's what I will mention. See, these are some goals for navigating the news. Now, I want to mention that in this section, I'm just going to talk about our personal emotional meter. And that is a very important thing to gauge when identifying, as a goal for navigating the news, doing an emotional check, right? Because people sometimes act out of emotion and respond out of emotion and share mis and disinformation, right? So I'm sure you can chime in the chat and add to this list if you feel like there are other goals. But we want to have a structure, right, for reading the news. We want to be able to discern fact from opinion. That seems to be really big. And what I'm looking at and observing, that people have a hard time discerning the difference between fact and opinion. We want to sharpen skills. We want to develop skills. We want to be able to not just identify content and what people are doing, who's the author, what's the purpose, etc. But we want to evaluate it. We want to be able to have an opinion about that, right? And then we expand literacy and critical thinking. So we created these cards to show you, which these cards we're going to give you at the end. So we're going to show you what to look for in reading the news. Each topic can be its own lesson. Oh my goodness, you can spend like a whole week, a whole unit just in one area. So it's up to you. These, you can do whatever with these cards, right? We were going to, like I said, share these with you at the end. We have two of these slides, right? So these are aligned with the key media literacy questions on author, purpose, symbols and techniques, representation, and interpretation. Who is behind the information? That would be the author. It could be a person, it could be a team of people, it could be an organization, it could be a corporation, right? Why was this information created? What was the purpose? Do they want to sell us something? Are they trying to persuade us and get us to think a certain way? Is it to inform? Usually news is put together to inform. What language, symbols, and techniques are used to grab and maintain our attention? Is the language loaded? What does the headline say? What techniques? What images? What sounds do we hear? Do we see? Whose voice is heard? Like what is the point of view, right? And whose voice are we hearing? And whose voice are we not hearing? And what's missing, right? Whose voice is being represented? All of those things we can look at and read like inside the message. And then we have these other set of cards. So before I talk about these, I just want to talk about the reading inside the message, which is a building block, and I will discuss that in a little bit later. But so we read inside and we read outside the message, right? And so there are different things that we do when we read outside the message. Some of them might be looking at the sources and then researching them, right? Like figuring out, like, is this a reliable source? We want to know, okay, so now here we are looking at news, right? Is this real? Is it like, are there any warning signs? Is this a fact? Is it an opinion? You want to ask, is this transparent? Like, are they revealing their sources? Right? So we're digging for accuracy. We're looking if it's reliably sourced, if it's transparent about the gathering of the sources. So if somebody says, sources say, that is not transparent. But if they name the actual source, that reveals transparency. So usually stories live in a context. So it's a news story. Any media is a story, it has a story. There's a plot, right? And so we're going to look at it in that way, right? And it lives in a context, and making sure that that context is provided is really important, because it's giving you the whole picture and what it's connected to. So unless you have like an opinion editorial, most stories stick to the facts and give facts and reveal sources with those facts, right? And if we're asking questions about who the intended audience is, that also reveals more information about the puzzle. Like, who is this message for? Like, who is it created for? Are they just like, is it, because then it helps obviously with a purpose as well, like thinking about, oh, this is for senior citizens, and it's, that's the target audience, and they're trying to sell them this medical plan, etc. Right? So our jobs as engaged citizens, educators, and parents is to help ourselves and then children become fluent, and to continually practice to ask questions. Think about how driving a car is now second nature. But when we were learning, we needed to understand what the signs were, what the symbols were, what the rules were, and then we had to practice to get better. And I can tell you that I'm really pretty good at parallel parking. I hope you are too. So what do we want our students to do? We want them to drive well in this information age with tools and skills. We want them to drive seamlessly and fluently with media and information. We want them to evaluate for credibility. And we do little by little. And by the time they're graduates, and we, have a society that is more critical thinking, and critical is not a bad thing. Critical just means that they're asking questions, right? That they're discovering the answers to those questions, is going through a process of inquiry with curiosity, right? That is critical thinking, and it's making connections between things, right? So, okay. So the building blocks to decode news. We've synthesized a lot of information, so hold on tight and tune in. Here we go. Building blocks. So I already started to discuss these, right? So we read inside, which could be translated as reading vertical, like up and down within the message, right? We're looking at all the components, like the author, the tone, the point of view, what evidence is there? What quotes are there? What are they saying? Who's being represented? Who's not being represented, right? But then we go outside and read across and read laterally, right? So we're investigating, who is this author? What is this topic? What about this image? What do other people say? We're going to find like 2 to 3 sources just to figure out if it's credible, especially if it's something that we're, if it's not a source that we necessarily would know about or that we trust, right? We're looking for different clues for fake news. Like, could this be fake news? And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, right? Fake and misleading information. Again, fact versus opinion. Facts can be proven with evidence. Opinions they're just personal beliefs and viewpoints of people. Is the information credible and accurate? Did we identify and review media bias? Did we look at subject matter experts? When we're looking at COVID information, we're looking for subject matter experts, not people with an opinion or with a blog, and definitely not a doctor of, say, psychology who's speaking on behalf of the science of COVID. We want to make sure that they are truly subject matter experts. We're looking for the evidence of the content and even looking at fact checker information, right? And all of that, after we have, we've done a few of these things, then we can form opinions about our findings. Like then we could share that message, right? So we're going to analyze in any order, and then we end with evaluating. So these things take practice to do efficiently and quickly. And so with practice, we can just do all of those. And you can start in any order, but of course, like I said, always end with evaluating. So you can contact us if you'd like our help with planning, building a tailored course, or consulting about like how to effectively reach students and your audience. So this is like, we're providing the recipe for navigating news. And as you can see, there is a lot to look for, and you don't have to do it all. It's just one little bite at a time, like, start small. So this is, we're going to touch on some of these ideas to help you, understand this a little better. Text plus the context equals the message. In media literacy, the text is not only in written form, but it is in any media form, right? A photograph is a text, a meme is a text, a video is a text, an infographic is a text, and what context it lives in creates a message, right? So where it lives within that, and so this is how we understand what the message is, right? And so looking, as I already stated, like the context, the purpose, the author, the sources, all of that is the context, and also like even the historical context. Here, we are looking at definitions with examples using the butterfly as the example, right? So I'm defining what these things are, but, right, a fact has to be proven with evidence, right? Butterflies get nutrients from mud puddles. Look it up. It is a fact. Subject matter experts have said that it's so, right? It's not an opinion. An opinion would be something like, all butterflies are beautiful. That is like, while you may think that, it's not necessarily a fact. Some people could actually think that certain butterflies are actually ugly, right? And so that's an opinion. A point of view is the position or angle of observation, right? People should not kill butterflies would be the example, right? That's a point of view. Is it a fact? I mean, it's an opinion as well. So, people should not kill butterflies. It's not necessarily, could it be proven to be true with evidence? Like that's an interesting one, right? This is where it becomes a little bit confusing, right? But really what we're looking at is, what is the point of view, right? So it's the point of view is the angle of observation. It's an anti, killing of butterflies point of view, right? It also, there is bias there, right? So the bias is in favor or against something or someone, preventing a person from reaching a fair or accurate position. Female butterflies are superior, right? So that would be a position, but it's a bias. It's also an opinion, right? So really digging deep into these, and I would do these like in high school, maybe middle school, definitely in college, to look at these. You can do something way simpler, the fact versus opinion, and that's a good place to start with elementary school students. Okay, so fact and opinion, POV bias. Now we're looking at fake news. And actually, I want to back up a little bit here, because there's a reader's bias, right? When we're reading news, there's the author's bias, and then there's also the bias of the company or organization the author represents. So there may or may not be bias. Ideally, some bias is actually not necessarily a bad thing. That most news is supposed to be objective. And so, but we still want to look for bias. I just wanted to point out, when I'm talking about bias, there are different kinds of biases. Okay, so these are some warning signs, right, for fake news. Using all caps. Do the headlines and the content match? Is this story completely unbelievable? Somebody just posted a picture on Facebook and said that Bill and Melinda Gates were clones, and there was like a before picture and after picture. That doesn't prove anything. They're just pictures. It doesn't prove that they're clones, right? It's an unbelievable story. Is the date missing? Is it old? Are the quotes and the pictures kind of weird? Is the content misleading? Do we have weird, sketchy URLs? Is everything in all caps? So these are some warning signs to look for. So when we talk about misleading content, now I wish I could really dig in deeper, but I'm giving you an overview, right? This is the overview of what we're looking for when, warning signs. So misleading content. So as you can read here, pseudoscience. So that's not necessarily real science. It's kind of science. It's not fully, credible science. It's pseudoscience, right? So that we have to be aware of that. We've seen a lot of that going around regarding coronavirus. Again, going back to the subject matter experts and the real science versus kind of science, right? Native advertising and sponsored content. Native advertising looks like traditional advertisements, and they're found in news stories. And sponsored content reads and feels like a regular article. And so we have to be aware of if we're reading something. Sometimes you'll see at the top, it says advertorial. Here in Taos, the Taos News has a story, and usually they say like sponsored or ad, they're supposed to, but certain entities might not. And then that's unethical, and they're breaking ethical policies. So we want to make sure that people are being ethical and that we're holding them accountable. And so that's misleading, right? Is the information, sometimes the information is out of context, and sometimes certain information, certain news stories will have facts. Or is it even a news story? If it's misleading or kind of fakeish, right? Then it's not even news, right? It's just information at that point. So it has some facts, but then it has some false information. So it is misleading. And so you have to look inside to figure out wait, this looks kind of weird. Let me look it up really quick, right? So that would be some misleading content. So you can put in the chat if you know of other dangers that you would add to the fake and misleading information in the list, right? Just take a breath here because it's a lot of information. Okay. So this is almost like a recap, right? This is actually from the Stanford education resource, from Stanford, from Stanford University. I forget their whole title. And it's like a synthesized version adapted from them. So it's the author plus the sources plus the evidence creates reliability and credibility in news. The author, who's behind this information? The source, what are other fact checkers saying? What are other people within, what are other people saying? Are they unnamed sources? The evidence, what are the facts? Are they backed up by sources in the story? Is the evidence is also what one finds outside of the story. So we have different techniques to help students navigate, right? Using media engages students. It can motivate interest in content discipline. It reveals the relevance of concepts. In this section, we're going to give examples of how to quickly deconstruct a piece of news. So we discuss where it can fit in content discipline, and we provide some ideas to practice with students. Before I move forward, I'm just going to look. Yes, Mallory, repetition and followers taking action. Unreliable content, blurred photos of UFO. Yeah, that's true. This is where the sketchy photos come in, right? And they're like, look, it's real. We have to be aware that sometimes one of the techniques that people use is repetition, right? And like when people repeat a certain story that may not be real, in people's mind, repetition creates like a certain reality where they feel they believe it to be true because they heard it so often. And this is why we have to continue to inoculate and create a place where if we see something that's fake, we have to call it out, right? We have to just say, wait a minute, this is not real, right? And some platforms like Facebook and Twitter are actually, have a place where you can flag things for fake news, and then they will go and take a look, right? Dennis says, appeals to share this with all of your friends are a good sign of fake news. Yes, that is true. Share this with all of your friends. So, however, if I say share this with all your friends, that's not necessarily fake news because I'm not doing news. I'm teaching about news, right? Okay, thanks for chiming in. Okay, so we are going to discuss like where it fits with content discipline. I may have already said this, right? So what we're going to do here is read this news media. I went on Instagram, and it's interesting because sometimes you only see like a picture and a headline, but this one actually had a story. So I'm going to read it. Germany to give over 600 million in coronavirus aid to remaining 240,000 Holocaust survivors. Scribner News is who put it together. Germany has agreed to pay approximately 240,000 Holocaust survivors, more than €500 million, as relief from the coronavirus. The Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, the Claims Conference, has mentioned that these payments will be issued over the next 2 years. Many of these survivors are on the poverty line, quote unquote, on the poverty line, have lost their entire families and are elderly and lonely and often have psychological issues due to their persecution under Nazi Germany. Survivors who fled Germany and aren't already receiving pensions from the German government, roughly 50% of whom live in Brooklyn, New York, will receive, it says will receive twice, will receive two payments of 1,200 euros or 1,400 over the next 2 years. What do you think? We want to hear from you. Comment below. And so that is the piece of news story, right? So where do we start? Let's start with the author. Scribner News. I don't know who Scribner News is, and later I'll show you that we do a little search for them. But okay, so that's the author. What source do they give? The Conference on Jewish, so I'm looking to the right. So what source do they give? The Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany. So they have a quote from them, right? That's who they pull the quote from. So that's source and that's evidence, right? But then we're going to look at language, right? The language would say that these survivors have lost their entire family, are elderly and lonely, and often have psychological issues. Now this, I'm not really sure, exactly like all the specifics of language. We see that like there is a point of view, right? That they're saying that these people are lonely and, are troubled. So that, we're just pointing out language, right? So what is the purpose of this piece of media? You can chime in at any point. You can chat in, right? I think the purpose is to inform. If you have a different opinion, you go ahead and chat it out. I think there's if you lose audio, you may need to leave And maybe we can put in the chat here that if you lose audio, obviously I'm speaking, so you're not going to be able to. Okay, so Dennis says, yeah, you just press reconnect and then it came back. So that's what you need to do. Okay, so going back to the story, what is missing? We don't hear the voice of the Holocaust survivors. I would like to hear what they have to say, but obviously this story is on Instagram and only has so much space, right? Yay, just hit reconnect. That's cool. So, okay, so hopefully Alma will read the chat. Okay, so let's look at some other source and transparency. It's really hard to see, but here on the top left, it says source AP News, right? So they got the story from AP News. And so that's where they originally pulled the story from, and then they covered it, right? And then so they're being transparent there. So there's some transparency, right? Oh, I just realized that the E under technique got weird. So sorry about that. So technique. Definitely a technique would be that this image tugs our emotions. You know, these are now elderly, but and it's true. Like, I'm not discrediting that this was actually a very difficult situation for these Holocaust survivors, right? And that it does, like, providing this image definitely makes me, you know, feel sad about what happened to them. And it does tug at my emotions. And you even see, like, the barbed wire, right? Where it's like you're starting to feel a sense of, at least I do, because it's my interpretation, right? Cruelty, you know, that of obviously we all know what happened. And so we already all have a point of view. And that is my point of view. Some other point of view might actually be, like somebody else's interpretation might be if they're, you know, if they don't like, they could have a different point of view, right? And we know what that could be, right? So that's, you know, so people will interpret this information depending on what they know and where they're coming from, right? And so if people are anti-Semitic, they would have a different point of view as far as how they read the story. So looks like Dennis here linked the negotiations between Claims Conference and German government result in significant increases for Holocaust survivor programs. Okay, so okay, I'm sorry, Mallory is missing audio. She keeps trying to reconnect, and I'm not sure exactly what. See, you guys are so good. Billy says she checked again against another news source and looked it up on AP, where it confirms that 662 million is to be giving. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Billy did just what we were going to do, right? She started to look outside, right? She started to figure out, like, what are other people saying, right? Let me look it up really quick. They're reading Laterally, right? I went and looked for the author. Who is Scribber? They are member-supported organization. They seem to be. I also went to this entity, allsides.com, that gives you an idea as far as, like, from their bias, of course, from their perspective, like what the bias is of Scribber Media. I go to allsides.com, and I also go to Adfontes Media, ADFONTES, Adfontes Media. And so, so it's, you know, they seem to have balance. According to All Sides, they are balanced reporting, and they don't usually use a lot of emotionalism, sensationalism, with, you know, they don't really have that slant in their news stories. So this is reading laterally would mean that you just, like, I sometimes I just say, is Scribner News reliable? Like, is this a reliable source? Who is Scribner News, etc. Right now I'm looking at the author and the bias, and also, like, who supports Scribner, right? So I went inside, I went to the About Us page, And I looked at, how do I know who Scribber is? And a huge part, it's like you're a detective in a way. But if I was actually going to share that story, I would do all of these things. If I felt like, whoa, is this real? Who is this? What's happening here? Right. So then this would be what we would be teaching our students, right? To go outside and to look and to figure out, is this real? Is it not? And we're looking at what other information is out there. So we want to make sure that we have 2 to 3 sources. I actually was looking at far left and far right and, in the center to figure out like, how are, which is the same thing Billy did, right? She went to figure out like, what is this for real, right? And so here, Breitbart News, who has a right-leaning bias, covers the story without too much of a far right bias. Now you could see that it says AP there, right? So they pull that from the AP, which is where a lot of news pulls information from, right? Every day the AP releases a certain amount of news, and so and people then cover it. So anyway, so this is where we are at, right? So that is how we look for when we are reading news, and it does take a lot of work, and so you don't have to do it all at once, but being fluent, like somebody like Billy, who used to be who was in the newspaper business, can probably do it in a minute or two, right? It takes me a little bit longer, maybe 5 minutes, to just go like, who's the author? What's this topic? What about this quote? And I just go outside. I almost don't read inside the message that much if it starts to look, I just scan it really quick and start looking outside and then go back inside. So I have like a technique that when I read news, of what I do, but eventually we want people to become that, right? Ourselves and then our students. So where does this information fit in a classroom? It could fit in social studies, English language arts, government, civics, math, science, arts. We want to examine history, government, society, and social studies, right? In nonfiction reading for comprehension and critical thinking and writing skills in English language arts, we want to evaluate multiple sources of information. All of this can be done in those classes. In government and civics, it's obvious. And then math, science, and arts, where we read a wide range of print and non-print texts to build understanding, data, charts, and infographics, right? To understanding of data, charts, and infographics. Sorry, dropped the off there. Need to correct that. I apologize. It also fits in global studies, economics, technology class. So what are different things that you can do? You can analyze one topic and then do a scavenger hunt. Take one of those things and just look at author, or just look at purpose, right? You could, so that would be something that students can do, or you can assign groups of students different activities. Like, you guys look for the author, you guys look for the purpose, and then come back and break people up into groups, and then they discuss in their group, and then they come back and report back, right? So that's, that's something people could do. Just look at one thing, but you would have to, as I'm going to speak later, model that first. So, fact or opinion quiz, right? So the BBC has the Skillwise quiz, which is a really cool quiz. And Lyndon, if you can put in that link, that would be great here. So fact and opinion quiz. We also have how well can you tell factual from opinion statements. So we have these two sources here for you that are linked in the chat for you to be able to look at, like, practicing fact and opinion. That is a perfect place to start as well, right? We want to compare and contrast maybe the same story, right, in different formats and points of view. So you might take one story like we just did, right, from Instagram, and then look at how they covered it in Twitter, and look at it the videos, or a traditional news agency, etc., like different people that are covering different things, right? So point of view, You can take one story. You can go to all sides, actually. And this is a good one for high schoolers. And what I like about all sides is that you can see one story and how it's covered in the left, right, and the middle, like all in on that website. And so it gives you an idea of bias, right? This is a media bias resource. And so looking for a point of view. Now, this obviously would be not for elementary school kids, and I would say high school, but maybe some middle schoolers. There are other things here that are also fun to do. So these are online activities, where some of the other ones could be on and offline. These are only, online. So you could do a reverse image search. You could do that with this app with TinEye, which is it's like, is it an app? It's a website that you go. You just go to TinEye and plug it in. You could also plug it into Google. You can go to Factitious, and it's this fun interactive game. I played it with my own kids, and they were having a lot of fun. So gaming is also gaming within education. That's also a fun way to engage students and engaging them and learning about is this a fact? Is it not? What do you think? We linked Factitious and is TinEye linked. We're going to link that in the chat as well. So like I was saying earlier today, we want to plan to analyze media in class. You can do an I do, where you model, if you're looking at, say, author, you model that, right? And you are using a think aloud strategy, right? Then you do a we do, where you practice deconstructing with the whole class on the same topic, right? Then you go and have groups do, where you create small groups, group tasks for teams to discuss and report back, obviously to analyze. And then individuals. So you can assign something to a student, and then they can showcase their understanding. That was a lot of information. And just so we can have some closure, we're going to talk about what we did, right? These are all the things that we covered. We explore the problem facing students today, and we provide literacy, media literacy, news literacy as a solution. We describe some of the building blocks for navigating news, which is reading inside and outside and looking at fact and opinion and credibility, sources, evidence, and looking at some, fake news and some misleading content, and looking at some of those warning signs. We provided a framework for reading the news media through a media literacy lens through asking questions and those scavenger hunt cards, right? We identified misleading information and just some warning signs for that and fake news, right? We provided tools, visuals, ideas, and resources to implement in your classroom. I wish we could have done more, but we really, are giving you an overview as to how to, what to look for, what to do, how it works. And hopefully we gave you something that you can use.